Lesson 5, Create and Configure Storage Accounts. In this lesson, we'll configure network access to the storage account. We'll create and configure storage accounts and generate a shared access signature, a SAS. We'll manage access keys. We'll monitor activity logs using log analytics and implement Azure Storage Replication. An Azure storage account holds all of your Azure storage data objects, like blobs, files, queues, tables, and disks. A storage account represents a unique namespace for your Azure storage data, accessible over HTTP or HTTPS from anywhere. Data in the Azure storage account is durable, highly available, secure, and vastly scalable. There are several different types of accounts, but the main account types are General Purpose v2, General Purpose v1, Block Blob storage accounts, File storage accounts, and Blob storage accounts. What we're actually going to do first is secure our access to our storage. Now that might seem like we're going to get the cart before the horse, but I'm going to show you how to configure and manage storage in the next lesson. I've already created another storage account. It's called MJS Songs 2019, and of course I'm going to store some MP3 files in here. Once we come into this area, we have our new menu here under MJS Songs 2019. I'm going to scroll down to Firewalls and Virtual Networks. Notice that the default is to allow access from all networks, including the internet. What we might want to do is configure our storage accounts to deny access to traffic from all networks and then grant access to traffic from specific VNets, choosing this radio button, Selected Networks. So we're building a secure network boundary for our applications. Realize that network rules are enforced on all protocols to Azure Storage. That includes REST and SMB, Server Message Block. And if you want to access the data with tools like Azure Portal, or if you download the Storage Explorer. As you can see here, I've downloaded the Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer, and you can see I've created a file share in MS Songs 2019 called Song Archive, and I've uploaded several MP3 files. This is from my album that I produced a few years ago called Lovesick Manifesto, and I've got my MP3 files up there. And so you might want to download this and run this from your local machine. And you can apply network rules to existing storage accounts, like I'm doing right here, or I could have done this when I created the new storage account, and of course we'll look at that in the next lesson. Once these network rules are applied, they're going to be enforced for every request. And if you're using shared access signatures, SAS, which we're going to look at in an upcoming lesson, SAS tokens, these will grant access to specific IP addresses, limiting access of the token holder. And they don't grant any new access beyond this configured network rule here. So if I wanted to add an existing virtual network, I could click on this plus here. I could go over to my subscription and choose, for example, my test group VNet or some other VNet if I had it, or get out of here. I could add a new virtual network right here on the fly. I can also go down here and add IP ranges to allow access from the internet or the on-premises network. As you can see below, it actually has my client IP address here, which I've got grayed out. I could also put in an IP address, or I could put in a CIDR prefix, like 57.224.240.0/24. Now, when I'm only allowing access from particular VNets, what I'm actually doing is I'm enabling a service endpoint, and this gives traffic an optimal route to the storage service. Each storage account supports up to 100 virtual network rules, and these can actually be combined with IP network rules. Now notice down here in this same area, realize you may have to go to your network administrator to actually get the internet-facing IP addresses that are used by your branch office, your regional office, or your headquarters. So you have to contact your network admin. If you're using Express Route from your premises, you'll have to identify the NAT network address translation IP addresses that are being used. Notice down here it says exceptions. So you could allow trusted Microsoft services to access this storage account. That would be things like Azure Backup, Azure Databox, Azure Event Grid, Azure Event Hubs, Azure Monitor, Azure Networking, Azure Site Recovery, and SQL Data Warehouse. You can also allow read access to storage logging from any network, or allow read access to storage metrics from any network if you wanted to, and just click on those checkboxes. When you're done, just click on Save. Before we leave, let's look at some basic PowerShell commands, just in case they ask you on the exam. Okay, notice the first command is get AZ storage account network rule set, followed by my resource group name, which is test group, then the account name, which is MJS Songs 2019, and we're finding out what is the default action. Issued that command, it said to deny. Okay, well let's change that to allow. So we use the command update AZ storage account network rule set, same thing, test group, MJS Songs 2019, and we said let's change the default action to allow, and you can see that we have allow, and again our IP rules here is showing my host machine. Also, based on the settings I showed you, we're allowing logging, we're allowing metrics, we're allowing Azure services. Okay, what if I want to set the default rule back to deny? We'll just go up, backspace over, and issue deny. Now, if I was in the CLI, the commands would be AZ storage account show, then AZ storage account update to set the default rule to either deny or allow. Okay, so remember these commands for the exam. I want to wrap up this demonstration looking at some of the comparisons of the 5 main storage account types. The first thing I want to show you, first of all, is that the general purpose version 1, if you notice to the far right, is the only one that supports the classic deployment model. All of the other 4 are going to use the ARM model, the Azure Resource Manager. Also realize that all of these are going to be encrypted with server-side encryption for data at rest. Notice that the general purpose v2, which is very popular, supports all the services. Blob, file, queue, table, and disk. It supports the standard and the premium performance tier. It supports the hot, cool, and archive tiers, and all the replication options, LRS, ZRS, GRS, and RAGRS. I'm not going to go through all of these elements, but make sure that you're familiar with this for the exam. Notice, for example, that block blob storage only supports block blobs, and append blobs only. It supports the premium tier, doesn't support any of the access tiers, and you only have LRS replication. File storage is also similar, files only, premium performance tier, access tiers aren't applicable, and it only supports LRS replication. So again, make sure you're familiar with these different storage account types and their different attributes for the exam. In this demonstration, you'll learn to create and perform basic configuration of a storage account. We'll use the Azure Portal, Azure PowerShell, Azure CLI, and an Azure Resource Manager template. Okay, let's go ahead and create and manage a storage account. And in the previous lesson, we actually controlled the network access to this storage account called MJS Songs 2019. So if you want to add a storage account, click on the Add button, and it says Create a Storage Account. Now remember, this is going to contain all of your data objects, and we're going to look at blobs in greater detail in the next lesson. Okay, so I don't want to get too deep into what blobs are all about because we're going to cover that later, but we know what files are. Okay, files, queues, tables, and disks. The storage account basically provides a unique namespace for your storage data accessible from anywhere in the world over HTTP or preferably HTTPS, and you have the choice. The data is durable, okay, high durability, high availability, it's secure, and it's massively scalable. So when you come down here, you're going to choose your project details.
I'm going to choose my pay-as-you-go subscription and an existing resource group. How about test group? If I want to create a new resource group on the fly, just click on the Create New link. Let's go down to the instance details. I need to give it a storage account name, and it's all lowercase letters and numbers, no dashes, no dots. So I'm going to say Shan Test Storage 9. That's not taken. Choose your location. You can see obviously tons of different locations. Based on where I am though, I'm going to go ahead and stick with US East, US. We could spend a lot of time here, and I don't want you to rely just on me doing a show and tell. I really encourage you to come into this area and get familiar with it, as well as some of the PowerShell commands and the Azure CLI, which we'll look at as well. So performance, you have standard or premium. If you're curious, move your mouse over the little information and it just tells you. The standard accounts are backed by magnetic drives and provide the lowest cost per gigabyte. They're good for bulk storage where data is accessed infrequently. Premium storage are backed by SSD, solid state drives, giving you consistency and low latency performance. They can only be used with Azure Virtual Machine disks and are best for I/O intensive applications like databases. Okay, so I'm going to stick with standard, which means I'm using the magnetic hard disks as opposed to the SSDs. Now, for the account kind, it is defaulting to Storage V2, General Purpose V2, which is basically access to all types of services, blobs, files, queues, tables, and disks. You can click on the drop-down and you can choose Storage General Purpose 1 or Blob Storage. Again, we'll look at Blob Storage in the next lesson, not sub-lesson, but lesson 6. For the exam, I think you'll be fine using Storage V2. It's very popular. We're also going to talk more about replication later on in this course, but just notice it's defaulting to read access, geo-redundant storage. The other choices are LRS, locally redundant storage, ZRS, zone redundant storage, and GRS, geo-redundant storage. Okay, I'm going to stick with the default. For my access tier, I'm going to choose hot as opposed to cool. I would choose cool if this was going to be, very infrequently accessed data. If I didn't want any advanced configuration, I could just click on Review and Create, or Review plus Create at the bottom. But let's click on Advanced. Notice that Secure Transfer Required is enabled by default. Basically, that means using HTTPS or, to be even more specific, Transport Layer Security. For virtual networks, I can allow access from all networks, or I can choose selected networks. And this is what we saw in the previous lesson. As I mentioned, you can configure this on the fly, or I could come back afterwards and I could go ahead and I could configure this like we saw in the previous lesson. We'll talk about blobs and data lakes a little bit later, but those features are disabled. Next, you can apply your tags, your name value pairs, for categorization, for compartmentalization, for change and control management, for inventory purposes, for consolidated billing, and other visibility and metrics. Once I'm done, click on Review and Create. The validation passed and we can go through. Notice, by the way, based on this configuration, I could download a template to automate this process again. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at configuring this with other methods like PowerShell, the CLI, and ARM templates. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to issue this command, get AZ location, so I can get a list of locations. I'm going to need that. I think I'm using, if I scroll up here, Central US, so you can see all those. I'm going to create a couple of variables here. Let's do one for resource group. That way I don't have to keep typing it in there. Test group. And let's do one for location. And it was Central US. Okay, so here's the PowerShell to create a general purpose V2 storage account with the read access geo-redundant storage, RAGRS. So we're using the new AZ storage account command. and then dash resource group name, followed by that variable I created, resource group, which we know is going to be replaced with test group. Then I have to have a unique name, so I called this ShanStore99. The location, again, is a variable being replaced by central US. SKU name, that's the read access geo-redundant storage RAGRS. That was the default that we chose when we did this before. And the kind of storage is storage v2. So you can see the result, ShanStore99, test group, central US, and the creation time and the provision state was succeeded. Okay, I'm not going to create one in the CLI. I'm just going to show you the commands here. I'm just going to copy and paste them in here. In the Azure CLI, I would do AZ storage account create, and then the name would be whatever the account name is, ShanStore98. The resource group, they're just putting in a new one here, but I would go ahead and designate test group, and then my location, West US, Central US, to use the previous example, there is the same SKU and the same storage kind, storage v2. So that's the command for the Azure CLI. Now, as far as the ARM templates go, I'd recommend going up to this website right here and scroll down about halfway, and you can see that we've got templates. First, the ARM template for the Azure PowerShell. You're going to create a couple of variables, and then you're going to use those in the new AZ resource group command. And then the new AZ resource group deployment is the command we use, and we're going to access that template. And here's the template URI at raw.githubuser.content.com. And you can just, you can copy this PowerShell, and you can click on try it, and you can go play around with it, sign in with your account, and play with it here. Also down here we see AZ group deployment create, and you can see it's still the same location and the same thing. You can try this in the Azure CLI. All right, I hope this was informative for you. I'll see you in the next lesson where we're going to look at the shared access signatures, or SAS implementation.
A shared access signature, SAS, lets you grant limited access to objects in your storage account to other clients without exposing and possibly compromising your account key. A SAS token gives you granular control over the type of access you grant to clients who have the SAS, including the SAS validity interval, SAS permissions, an IP address or addresses, and you can restrict them to HTTPS as opposed to HTTP.
As you can see, I'm in the Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer. This is the best place to actually create SAS tokens. Now, before we actually do that, let me just tell you that the easiest and the most powerful way to control access to our storage account is using access keys. And we're going to be looking at access keys here in an upcoming sub-lesson. But the reason why we're looking at this one first is because access keys in the wrong hands are much more dangerous. So really only certain roles or certain users should actually use the access keys to access these storage accounts and the contents of the storage account. As a matter of fact, we need to carefully protect those keys using either Azure Key Vault, which we'll look at, or by using hardware security modules, HSMs. Now you can see we're looking at my pay-as-you-go subscription, and also notice, by the way, if we look under storage accounts, here's the actual ShanStore99. That's the one I created using PowerShell in the previous sub-lesson, remember? But I didn't actually go and take a look at it in the portal, but we can see it right here. So let's say I want to generate a temporary SAS token for ShanStore99. If I click on it, notice down below where it says Actions, I can get a shared access signature. Let's click on that link. And here we can see our shared access signature. Now, I want you to notice the metadata or the actual settings here. Because if you decide to do this programmatically, let's say in a command line tool, or using an Azure PowerShell commandlet, the variables will be things like start time, expiry time, account name, account key, the name of the object like a container, for example. But notice that we're going to choose our start time, and we can just stick with the defaults. It's 24 hours, okay? So it's basically 7:15 at 6:28 p.m. to 7:16, 6:28 p.m. And of course, I can modify this as I want to. I'm going to base it on my local time zone, which is Central Standard Time. I can then apply what type of permissions do I want in this token. Notice the options: read, write, delete, list, add, create, update, and process. By default, only read and list are selected. If I was applying this, by the way, to the entire storage account, which I could do that, notice I'm going to have a choice of different services: blobs or not, files or not, queues or not, tables or not. And then we have 3 different resource types. When I'm done, I'll just click on Create. So here's my account name, and I can just copy the connection string and the query string and give that to my user. Now, an extra exam tip to remember is if you want to generate SAS tokens using Azure PowerShell commandlets, I want you to remember, obviously, the different metadata we saw earlier, like account name, start time, and those things. But what you really need to know are the different commandlets that you have available to you. So notice we have the new AZ storage account SAS token, storage container SAS token, storage blob token, table, file, share, and queue SAS token. These are the commandlets that you can use to generate SAS tokens for a variety of storage services. All right, I hope you learned some stuff in this lesson. Also, don't forget to download that Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer and familiarize yourself with that tool for the exam.
Let's talk about storage access keys. Each Access storage account has 2 keys, a primary key and a secondary key. We use those 2 keys so that you can have a rotation scheme. These 2 keys are used to authenticate application requests to your storage accounts. Whoever has access to these keys has unlimited access to the entire storage account. So it's highly recommended that you store the access keys in a secure location like Azure Key Vault. Also, never share the keys. Whenever possible, let's use shared access signatures or SAS. And finally, regenerate your keys on a regular basis.
Okay, in this sub-lesson on managing access keys, we're going to look at the Storage Explorer again. And on the exam, you need to be aware of how to install and use the Azure Storage Explorer. So hopefully you can download the tool. It's a standalone application, as we saw in the previous sub-lesson, that lets us effortlessly work with Azure storage data on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux system. Now, as far as Windows goes, Windows 10 is recommended. That's what I'm running it on, but it also is supported on Windows 8 and Windows 7. For all versions of Windows, the .NET Framework 4.62 or higher is required. There's several ways to interact. You can connect to storage accounts associated with your Azure subscriptions. We saw that in the previous sub-lesson. You can connect to storage accounts and services that are shared from other Azure subscriptions. And you can connect to and manage local storage by using the Azure Storage Emulator. Also, you can work with storage accounts in global and national Azure by connecting to an Azure subscription, managing storage resources that belong to your Azure subscription, working with local development storage, managing local storage by using the Azure Storage Emulator. You can attach to external storage, managing storage resources that belong to another Azure subscription or that are under national Azure clouds by using the storage account's name, key, and endpoints. You can attach to a storage account or service using SAS, shared access signatures. And you can connect to an Azure Cosmos DB account. Now, that being said, I want to begin looking at the access keys from the perspective of the Microsoft Azure portal. So if I go to my home and then go to storage accounts, let's go ahead and choose MJ Songs 2019. And notice that brings up a new menu for me. I can go down here and under Settings, click on Access Keys. So basically, this is a combination of the storage account name, MJ Songs 2019, and an access key, which, by the way, with this key, I have full access to all the data and all the services within the storage account. So I can create, I can read, I can update, I can delete everything, okay? File shares, as we see here, or containers, blobs, tables, and queues. I also have full admin access to everything other than the storage account itself, even though with the keys I can't delete the storage account, nor can I change the settings like its type, for example. Now, applications will use the storage account name and key for access to storage. Sometimes that key is actually used to generate a shared access signature token, a SAS token, or sometimes it's used for direct access. Notice that each storage account, as we see here, has two access keys. This lets us modify applications to use the second key instead of the first key and then regenerate the first key. This is known as key rolling, so it lets us reset the primary key without any downtime for applications that actually access storage directly using the access key. By the way, storage account access keys can be regenerated using the Azure portal with these two commands. In PowerShell, it's the new AZ storage account key commandlet, and for Azure CLI, it's this command, AZ storage account keys renew. And again, I can't emphasize how important it is to protect the storage account access keys because of the access that they provide. So Azure Key Vault helps safeguard cryptographic keys and secrets that are used by applications and services. So obviously, I can move up here and copy to the clipboard key 1 or the connection string, or key 2 or the connection string, or I can click on the regenerate symbol to regenerate key 1 and key 2. For the exam, remember, if I have applications using this second key and then regenerate the first key, that's called key rolling. Okay, so I was talking the talk about Key Vault. Let's go ahead and walk the walk. I'm going to go up here to All Services, and I'm just going to go up here and start typing in Key Vaults, and hopefully I'll see Key Vaults, and there it is. I have an existing Key Vault called Chalubi Vault 0. If I wanted to add one, I would click on Add, and I would name it, let's say Chalubi Vault 1, pay as you go, choose my resource group, choose my location, go with the standard pricing. The principal selected is me, okay, and then we have all networks can access and then create it, okay. That's what I did when I created Chalubi Vault 0. So let's go ahead and select that one. And we could do keys, and we'll talk about that, for example, if you want to do key pairs. But let's do secrets, because that's what relates to what we're doing right now. We want to import a secret, so we're going to do it manually, and we're going to call this ShanStore99 primary. Now to get the value, hey, let's go back and use that Explorer. So here's the Explorer. Click on ShanStore99, copy the primary key, go back and enter the value, just paste it in there. You can also look at it, little eyeball there, doink, in case you're curious. You can put in some content type, set an activation date, set an expiration date. It's enabled, click on Create. And now we've got that primary storage key in the Key Vault. Okay, so back over in the Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer, notice that when I choose my storage account, MJS Songs 2019, down here you can see copy primary key or copy secondary key. All right, well this is something, by the way, that you might want to monitor. So in the next sub-lesson, we'll revisit the concept of monitoring the activity log using log analytics.
Azure Monitor log data is still stored in the Log Analytics workspace and is still collected and analyzed by the same Log Analytics service. But Microsoft is changing the term Log Analytics in many places to Azure Monitor Logs. All data collected by Azure Monitor fits into one of two fundamental types, either metrics or logs. Data collected by Azure Monitor Logs is stored in a Log Analytics workspace. The Azure Activity Log provides insight into subscription-level events that have happened in your Azure subscription. Connecting the Activity Log to a Log Analytics workspace provides several advantages. It consolidates the activity log from multiple Azure subscriptions into a single location for analysis. You can store activity log entries for more than 90 days. You can correlate activity log data with other monitoring data collected by Azure Monitor. And it uses log queries to perform complex analysis and gain deep insights on activity log entries.
Okay, let's follow up on our previous lesson by looking at some monitoring of our storage groups. So I'm going to go over here to the monitor area on the far left. Click on monitor. And a couple of things. I'm going to start out by first going to the activity log. And I'm going to look at my pay-as-you-go subscription. I'm going to do a time span of the last 24 hours. Event severity, I can do, let's see, critical, error, warning, informational. I'm going to do all. Let's add a filter, and let's look for the resource type. Notice you can go through this whole long list. Let's just do storage accounts. Last 24 hours. Let's apply that. Excellent. So you can see the activities here. Listing of storage account keys, updating the storage account create. I can download these as a CSV file. Open that up. And I can see my results in a CSV file. This can of course be exported, or a ton of different business analysis tools can be used. Excellent. Let's go back over here to logs and create a workspace. From the test group, locate this in Central US, the per gigabyte pricing tier, OK. And we've seen this in earlier lessons. Now that the process is done, notice you can see in all resources here, I could filter this out, but I can see it right here. Log Analytics Workspace, Storage WS01, where it says Configure Monitoring Solutions. I can click on View Solutions. Over the last 24 hours, I can click on Logs. And I can run a query, as we saw earlier. Here's some sample queries for data usage, for example. If I go back here, I can add some solutions from the marketplace to run against my data in storage. Again, we'll be returning to monitoring our activity logs and using log analytics on and on throughout this entire course.
Data in your storage account is always replicated to guarantee durability and high availability. Azure Storage copies your data so that it's protected from planned and unplanned events, including transient hardware failures, network outages, power outages, or substantial natural disasters. You can choose to replicate your data within the same data center, across zonal data centers within the same region, or across geographically separated regions. We have 4 options. They include locally redundant storage, LRS, zone redundant storage, ZRS, geo-redundant storage, GRS, and read access geo-redundant storage, RAGRS. Let's go take a look at a table that shows the differences here. So we've got 4 scenarios here. The first scenario is basically storage account types supported, right? So what storage account types are supported by RAGRS? Well, GPv1, General Purpose v2, and Blob. Those 3 are also supported by LRS. Notice that ZRS only supports GP version 2. So remember that for the exam. Zone redundant storage only supports General Purpose version 2. GRS also supports GPv1, GPv2, and Blob storage. All of the different replication options are going to give us service or other failure in the data center. That's available. Notice, however, that for a failure impacting the entire data center, for example, a fire, okay, only LRS is not available. The other three types are available. For failure impacting all the data centers in a region, for example, some huge superstorm, with RAGRS, you get read access only until failed over. With LRS, it's not available. With ZRS, it's not available. And with GRS, it's Microsoft controlled failover. What about durability? With RAGRS, we get at least 16 nines. That's basically 9 point and then 14 nines after that. With LRS, you get at least 11 nines. With ZRS, you get at least 12 nines. And with GRS, you get at least 16 nines. By the way, don't forget durability is not the same thing as availability. Okay? Durability is actually maintaining the existence of the object. Okay? Availability is your ability to access that object. Okay? Notice that with all the options, we have server or other failure in the data center protection. Also, the availability SLA, service level agreement for read requests on RAGRS is at least 99.99. Okay, so that's 4 nines. Now, what does the asterisk mean here, by the way? That means that the availability SLA is only 99% if you're using the cool access tier. So keep that in mind. So notice that RAGRS is the highest availability SLA for read requests. Okay, the LRS, ZRS, and GRS all have 99.9 or 3 nines availability for read requests. Finally, the availability SLA for write requests across all replication options is going to be 3 nines, at least 99.9%. Realize, however, that if you're using the cool access tier, the availability SLA for write requests is only 99% or 2 nines. Again, however, the asterisk tells us that the write request availability is only 99% when you're using the cool access tier. Remember this information for the exam.
Okay, as you can see, I'm in my storage accounts area. Don't forget the data in my storage accounts is always replicated for extremely high durability, at least 11 nines, and high availability, either 3 nines or 4 nines, unless it's in a cool access tier, then I'm going to get 99% or 2 nines. Let's take a look at ShanStore here real quick. If you remember, it has the default replication of read access geo-redundant storage, RAGRS, which we know supports storage v2 or general purpose v2. It also supports general purpose v1 and Blob. Why am I reminding you of that? Because of the exam. RAGRS is the default, so it's very likely it'll be on the exam. Remember, I'm protected if a server or other failure happens in the data center, or if there's a fire in the data center, or if it impacts all the data centers in a region, I'm going to get read access only until it fails over. For example, if there's an earthquake or something like that. With RAGRS, remember, I'm going to get at least 16 nines of durability. My availability SLA for read request is 4 nines, and my availability SLA for write request is 3 nines, reminding you because of the exam. Now I can move my storage comfortably between the LRS, GRS, and RAGRS replication modes. So for example, if I click on configuration down here under settings, notice I can change my replication to LRS or GRS. Now migrating to the ZRS mode or from the ZRS mode is going to be quite a bit different. And for the exam, remember this. The recommendation would be to copy the data in this ShanStore 99 to some new storage account that has the desired replication mode, and I could use a tool like AZ copy. This could lead to some downtime with the applications, or I could go to Azure support if this is, an enterprise solution and ask for a live data migration. All right, what if I want to do this in the Azure PowerShell? Well, the commandlets would be new set-AZ storage account at the creation, or after creation, I can use the commandlet set-AZ storage account. Remember, if my data set is pretty large, or if I don't have good connectivity to or from my data on the internet, I may want to physically ship the data and import it into Microsoft Azure instead of uploading it. One way is to use the Azure Import and Export service, or I could use Azure Data Box, which is a device that Microsoft sends us that lets us copy our data to the box, and then we ship the box back to Microsoft for uploading to Azure. In this lesson, we're going to configure Azure Active Directory authentication for a storage account. With Azure AD, you can implement RBAC, role-based access control, to give permissions to users, groups, or application service principals. Azure AD authorizes access rights to secured resources through RBAC. Azure Storage defines a set of built-in RBAC roles made up of common permission sets that we use to access Blob and queue data. Principals are authenticated by Active Directory to return an OAuth 2.0 security token, which then authorizes a request against Blob or queue storage. You can also define custom roles for access to Blob and queue data. This is an improvement over shared key authorization, which has intrinsic security vulnerabilities. Only storage accounts created with the ARM deployment model support Azure AD authorization. Azure Files supports authorization with Azure AD over Server Message Block SMB for domain-joined VMs only. Let's go check out the configuration in the Azure portal. Now, even though we can do RBAC roles for blobs and queues on the exam, you need to be aware of how to do this for blobs. So I'm in a storage account, and I'm going to go ahead and go over here to the storage account menu on the left-hand side and go to containers. And I've got a container here called Music Files 2020. Open that up, and I'll see some music files that I've uploaded, some MP3s. And so over here on the left-hand side, we see the access control IAM. We'll click on that. You can see some user-friendly prompts over here, add a role assignment, view role assignments, view deny assignments. Or you can go up here to these links. Now, one thing I want to mention before we get into this is that before you start assigning RBAC roles to these principals, you have to determine the scope of that security principal. So typically a best practice is to do the narrowest possible scope, so a least privilege approach. So there are 5 levels that you can scope the access for Blob and queue resources. So the narrowest scope would be an individual container. So the role would apply to all the blobs in the container. That includes the container properties and metadata. Then there's an individual queue. And then above that you have the storage account. I could do resource scope on the entire ShanCan 2020 storage account. And then of course above that would be the resource group, and then the highest level would be the subscription. So your role assignment would apply to all the containers or queues in all of the storage accounts in all of the resource groups in that particular subscription. So we'll click on this little role assignments here. And here I am down here. You can see my owner role. Now, as the owner of your storage account, you're not automatically assigned permissions to access data. So you have to explicitly assign yourself an RBAC role for Azure Storage. And again, we know the different levels you can scope that at. Let's go over here to roles real quick. You can obviously see, these are ones we've already looked at before. We've already seen owner and contributor and reader, but some of these are specific to blob storage and queue storage. So if I scroll down here, you can see storage blob data contributor, storage blob data owner, storage blob data reader, and storage blob delegator. And by the way, if you move your mouse over here to the little eye, it'll tell you what you can do. Okay, so the storage blob delegator allows for the generation of a user delegation key, which can be used to sign SAS tokens. Now, if I go up here to add, I can add a role assignment. And you can see I've got another user here I created, Sam. Sam can too. Okay, so I could choose the role, let's say reader, and I'm going to assign that to Azure AD user, but you can also see all these other options here. And we'll choose Sam can too, and we'll save it. And now we go back to role assignments, and we'll see not only myself, the owner, but Sam can too, the reader.